F1 fans, and welcome to the Formula One News Hour. I'm Jonathan Steele, your host, and we're midweek for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and of course Abu Dhabi Grand Prix is the last for the 22 season. So we're fast coming to the end of this season, but do not despair, we are not coming to the end of the Formula One News Hour podcasts. They will continue during the off season, and we'll be bringing to you interviews and other interesting news and interesting information about Formula One, both past and present. So stay with us as we go through the off season. There's always lots of news during the off season, and it looks like news for this week is going to be that Mick Schumacher is out at Haas, and Nico Hülkenberg is in. Kind of sad for Mick Schumacher. I think a lot of people don't think that he was afforded enough time. The problem, of course, is that Haas is probably out of all the teams on the tighter budget, and Mick did manage to demolish a few cars along the way, and so I think the cost of putting together those cars is probably what made the final decision in the Haas decision to move on. But anyway, that pretty much rounds out next year's season. All the seats are taken up. The other bit of news that is coming out is that Danny Ricciardo might take the reserve driver position at Red Bull. It's kind of been unofficially leaked that he's going to take that position. Of course, Red Bull don't have to pay his salary for next year because under his contract terms, McLaren still has to pay his full salary for 2023. So it doesn't cost anything for Red Bull to take him on, and quite frankly gives them a really credible backup driver should they need it. So anyway, that's the news. Before we get into the history of this month, Andre, my producer and technical guru, said, John, what's wrong? You look like you're a little under the weather last week. Well, I am under the weather. I've been fighting shingles for the last 3 weeks now, going into 4 weeks. And the best advice I can give, because there is no treatment for shingles, if you are over 50 and you've had chicken pox, please go get your shingles shot, because it is one of the more unpleasant things that you're going to go through in life if you don't. It feels like somebody is taking red hot pokers and burning your skin from the inside, and then from the outside, and then from the inside. So is it draining? Yes. But I believe, and I've always thought, that I have a high pain tolerance. I've broken a lot of bones in my life and had a number of operations to fix things from car wrecks and from cancer. I had cancer 8 years ago, and have yet to take a painkiller for anything, and refuse to do so today. So sorry if I just sound a little off or look a little off, but I am fighting shingles, and of course I don't want to not bring the Formula One News Hour to you. So, but let's go ahead, before we get going on the history, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors. And fortunately, all this last 2 or 3 months, we've managed to maintain the sponsorship of Thinology, of El American, of Inform America, of Off the Press, of Moms for Liberty, of Give, Send, Go, and a couple of others that over the time have come and gone. But we thank all of our sponsors, and in fact, we'll just go ahead and have the Moms for Liberty bring you the history for this week's podcast. Moms for Liberty is an organization that is out there drumming up and getting parents involved in their children's education. Too much time today is spent on teaching things other than math, English, science, and all those things that are really going to help our children as they grow into adulthood and then want to get out there and get jobs and get careers and stuff. And too much time is being focused on the other stuff. Moms for Liberty is an organization that last count had 183 chapters throughout the country, and they are growing, and they're growing because folks like you, the parents, are getting involved and wanting to become more involved in your children's education. Get involved at the school board level, get involved at the student level, at the teachers. Don't let these teachers dictate what your children should learn about social things in life. There's a teacher out there that is bragging in California, bragging that and telling her students, your parents are dumb, they're stupid. I'm smarter than they are, you're smarter than they are, don't listen to your parents. What kind of a teacher is that? Well, Moms for Liberty wants to remove those teachers from the classroom. You can help. Go to momsforliberty.org. That is momsforliberty.org. Okay, so we are going to go to our history for this week, and the history that we're going to talk about is one of the shorter lived lives in Formula One circles, and that is François Cevert of France, one of the few French Formula One drivers of the time. He was born in 1946. His father was a Russian Jew. He had exiled from Russia before the war, of course, and he married a French woman who was a Christian. And to avoid being picked up and sent off to the concentration camps into Poland, then Francois's father joined the French resistance and went underground for 2 to 3 years. Francois was one of 4 children. So what the family did to hide the fact that Francois and his siblings were Jewish, they changed their name from Hockenberg, that was the father's name, to Cevert, which was the mother's maiden name. And so Cevert became the name throughout. After the war, the father wanted to change it back, but they said no. The family overruled him and said, everybody knows us now as the Ceverts, and that's what we'll be. His father went on to be a very successful jeweler in Paris, had a very successful business, and his father actually lived to be 85, 86 years old, so ended up having a nice long life. So Francois really got involved in motor racing, not the same as those guys, a lot of those guys did back in the 60s by going to rallies and then into saloon car racing and stuff like that. Kind of strange. He was like a couple of other guys we've talked about. He actually got involved in motorcycle racing. So he started off, actually about 16, he started racing Vespa scooters against little organizations there in the Paris neighborhoods. But then when he was about 19, bought himself a Norton motorcycle and started getting involved in in motorcycle racing on his Norton. In the later 60s, 67, 68, he switched to racing cars, and he put himself through the Le Mans car racing school and another racing stable school, and then he entered the Shell competition, and what that competition was it was for Formula 3, and whoever won the race at the end of the season, then they were given a Formula 3 car, and Francois won that car and decided to enter it into the Formula 3 circuit. Now, he didn't have the money or the mechanics or the team or anything behind him, so that was not a very successful venture for him, but what it did do was get him noticed by other car companies. And so one of those companies was the French company Tecnap, and so he got himself a ride in Formula 2. And back then, if you remember, a lot of the Formula 1 drivers also drove in Formula 2 races. And in one of those races, he would challenge somebody, and in fact, I should say that person was challenging Francois during a race to get around him, and really struggled to do that. That person was Jackie Stewart. Jackie Stewart was driving for Tyrrell at the time, Ken Tyrrell Motorsports. And Ken Tyrrell at the end of that race, Jackie Stewart at the end of that race went to Ken Tyrrell and said, Ken, you've got to really watch this guy, François Cevert. He is somebody to be reckoned with. He is a really, really good driver. And so from that, the relationship developed, and the following season, so that was about 1969, and then in 1970, one of the Tyrrell drivers dropped out, and Tyrrell was looking for another driver, and Ken Tyrrell remembered what Jackie Stewart had told him and went out and got François Cevert. So then François' Formula One career began. During that first year in 1970, François had a somewhat successful beginning. He actually won a Grand Prix, albeit because of bad luck of other drivers, but he did go on to win a Grand Prix, and actually challenged, and a couple of them challenged his teammate Jackie Stewart for position as well. But overall, it was not a really big eventful year for him, but it was a very, how would you say, learning year. Getting into 71 was quite different. 71 saw him really flourish as a driver, and he would come in second a lot of times to Jackie Stewart, and he was also challenging guys like Emerson Fittipaldi and Denny Hume for races all of the time. So he was earning points in the championship series, and was really getting noticed by everybody around him. He was a very different driver. He maybe took more risks than all the other drivers, and you've got to remember, he's driving in an era where cars' reliabilities were really poor. So when you challenged the car and pushed the car to its ultimate limits, sometimes it would let you down, and that happened to many of his friends, many of his fellow drivers. And but anyway, nonetheless, 1971 turned out to be kind of a really good year, both for Ken Tyrrell, for Jackie Stewart. As you remember, he won the World Championship that year, and for François Cevert, it was a very good year as well. And things were looking up for both the team and for François Cevert individually. He was now firmly entrenched as Jackie Stewart's teammate, the number 2 driver on the Tyrrell team. 1972 would be a very different year for Ken Tyrrell, Jackie Stewart, and the whole Formula One team of Tyrrell Motors. It was a year that Ken Tyrrell actually took over full ownership of the team. Until that time, he had been kind of manager of the team, although it had his name. But he didn't own it outright, and in 1972, of course, he took over full ownership of the team. But they just did not have a good year. Lots of stuff went wrong, and they had lots of DNFs, did not finishes, and Jackie Stewart did not win the championship that year, and it was kind of just an all-around frustrating year, but everybody kind of got out of it healthy. And of course, back in those times, getting out of it healthy was always good. But lots of things were learned for the following year, for 1973. And so it was that 1973 came along, and François, of course, was firmly entrenched in Tyrrell. And in fact, at the beginning of the 1973 season, Jackie Stewart had quietly made a decision on his own that would be his last year in racing, that 1973 was going to be his last year. And as it turned out, he won the championship that year in 1973, winning, I think, 6 or 7 of the 11 or 12 race circuits at that time, winning 5 of them in a row. And François Cevert was right there behind him, coming in second, earning lots of points, and in fact actually did win another Grand Prix that year. He did not win many Grand Prix, but he had a lot of seconds and thirds and things like that. And he also branched out, and he was driving other things like Le Mans cars and saloon cars and just general other types of race cars. But he was primarily one of the few drivers that really just focused on Formula One. And he was doing great. And they came to the Watkins Glen, the US Grand Prix at Watkins Glen, where he lost his life. In fact, Jackie Stewart had won the World Championship the race before, and that Watkins Glen race would have been his last race. As it turns out, he did not race that last race. But something very interesting. You know, I have children, and I've always taught my children that, especially when you're driving a stick shift, that you've got to get the engine to match the speed of the car and the right selected gear, because the engine becomes a very stabilizing feature of the car as you go through corners. So it's not just to get to the right gear to get out of the corner and accelerate on, but it's to get that engine to get the correct balance in the car. And before Jackie Stewart left Watkins Glen that year, he wanted to know what went wrong for Francois, because this is one of the rare cases that it was not quote unquote the car. The car did become unstable in the corner, in the S's as they were commonly known, and he did lose it, and he ended up bouncing off one barrier and going 90 degrees into the barrier on the other side and losing his life. But Jackie Stewart couldn't understand why, and so Jackie Stewart went through. He had talked to Francois about the S's, and Francois went through the S's in a different gear than Jackie Stewart. And Jackie Stewart tried to emphasize on him the need to drop down one more gear to get those engine RPM equal to what it should be for the speed and the cornering and to stabilize the car. And before he went home, he did a test. And he tried to take the S's in the same gear, at the same speed as Francois did that day, and realized that that was the reason that Francois lost his life. He had gone into those S's in the wrong gear, and he noticed as he was going through the S's that the car bounced a lot more than when he went through the S's in the one gear lower. He went down one gear lower than Francois to bring the engine RPM up, going through those S's, which stabilized the car. So it was really Francois, and he was well known for being a really aggressive, gung-ho driver, but it was really, in the end, the choice of a gear going through those S's that caused Francois to lose his life. For the following year at Watkins Glen, they didn't take out the S's, but they put in another corner just before the S's to slow the car down, because the S's like that, you can get through them at really fast speed. But just because of if you start looking at it from a point of view of taking turns or going in a straight line, you could straighten out the S's somewhat. But as Jackie demonstrated, when you did that in too high a gear, then the car would bounce. And when the car bounced, it lost traction. When it lost traction, then of course you lose everything. The following year they took that out, but Watkins Glen lost its Formula One after that following year, and of course they took that curve out, and the S's are back to what they were. But Francois had a short-lived Formula One career, as many did in that time, but not as many that were really, really good. And he was recognized for being really, really good at what he did, at his craft of driving a Formula One car. And sadly, his own decisions would lead, to the end of his life. But remember what Bruce McLaren said. If you don't go out and attack life and achieve something, then what's the point of living life? So for François Cevert, he was trying to achieve something great, and probably in his own mind did. but unfortunately we lost him, one, at a young age, and two, the other sad thing was that he would have become Tyrrell's #1 driver for 1974. So that's the history for this week. We've got practice and qualifying coming up Friday and Saturday, and I look forward to bringing that to you. In the meantime, we'll see you in a couple of days. And welcome back, Formula One fans. It is Saturday, November 19th, and that means it is qualifying day for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. It is also the last qualifying day in the career of Sebastian Vettel. Sebastian, although only 35 years old, some 5 or 6 years younger than the likes of Alfonso, and 2 to 3 years younger than Hamilton, nonetheless has decided at 35 his Formula One career is going to come to an end, and so today is his last qualifying session and tomorrow will be his last race. And of course, if you just go out there and on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, all the different social media sites, you'll see a lot of tributes and a lot of things to Sebastian Vettel, a worthy 4-time world champion and one of the, I guess you could say, nicer guys. He's big into the environment and helping people and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does with his career. Yesterday we finished up, we finished up practice earlier today, but the free practice 1 sessions were a lot of the young drivers and Indy Car drivers coming over and testing their skills in Formula One cars. And so yesterday in practice sessions wasn't a lot of really interesting news other than watching the younger guys and not so experienced guys, the Indy Car guys, getting their chance to drive Formula One cars. Today, as free practice 3 ended, then it saw the typical Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz, Perez, all those guys in the top 5 or 6. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens here in qualifying. My guess is we're going to have Red Bull pulling out the pole position. The only question would be, will Max Verstappen let it be Sergio Perez and give him a good kind of oomph into getting that second place in the championship position for the year? Remember, Sergio Perez is battling Charles Leclerc for the second position, and what's interesting is that Ferrari and Mercedes are battling for the second position in the Constructors' Championships. So the Constructors' Championship positions means a lot for money. Of course, Red Bull's already made their money and lost some money, albeit $7 million fine that gets taken away from their budget for next year. But everything I've read is that Max Verstappen is actually going to pay that fine for them, and so it won't affect their bottom line next year. Anyway, interesting, intriguing things going on there. But the qualifying 1 session is about to start, and so we should watch and see where the different teams are going to end up here. Will Sebastian Vettel make it out of qualifying 1? The Aston Martins have struggled the last few weeks. Will Danny Ricciardo, who's also now facing his last Formula One race, at least for another year, unless he steps in to back up Sergio Perez or Max Verstappen at some point during next season, but also Danny Ricciardo is out of a ride for next year. As I said in the run-up to the history portion of this podcast, it was rumored that he would take up the reserve position for Red Bull. That has now been confirmed, that Danny Ricciardo will in fact take up the reserve position for Red Bull. And if you want my guess, you're going to find Mick Schumacher in a reserve position for Mercedes next year as well. Toto Wolff has a big soft spot for Mick Schumacher, and I think he's going to find a way to get Mick involved in that team for next year. And let's face it, although Mick did have quite a few crashes, he wasn't probably any worse, other than he crashed more times, in terms of positions on the track and qualifying. And he normally out-qualified his teammate Kevin Magnussen. So it's going to be interesting for Haas next year. They got Nicky Hülkenberg as their number 2 driver. And so, we'll just see how that falls out for next year. Of course, they've got good financial security in that they've got a new number 1 sponsor to help pay the bills. So I'm sure that Haas is looking forward to 2023. So now let's get going. The qualifying sessions for 1 is underway, and let's take a look and see where we are. We're midway through Q1 session, and let's see where we are. So we're 7 minutes into Q1 session, and we've got Verstappen, Perez, and then Hamilton and the Ferraris after that in the top 5. In the bottom 5 we have Gasly, Albon, Bottas. That's strange, Bottas in the bottom 5, and then Schumacher and Latifi. Of course, nobody's surprised to see Latifi there. And of course, this is also Latifi's last weekend in Formula One. And probably for Latifi, it is probably his last weekend. I don't see any other teams picking him up in the future. Like I said, he was picked up originally by Williams because he brought to the team a lot of money. But since they were acquired by a group out of the US, Williams doesn't need the Latifi money, and so his days in Formula One are probably over. So at the end of the Q1 session, it is the 2 Red Bulls, then the 2 Ferraris, and then Lando Norris rounding out the top 5. And the bottom 5 is we've lost Magnussen, we've lost Gasly, Bottas, Albon and Latifi. So it's strange to see Albon out so early. The last few weeks he's done quite well and got himself into at least qualifying 2 and qualifying 3. So interesting there. I don't know what's happened with the Williams, whether this track just doesn't suit them or what, but the other strange thing is to see Bottas out so early. The last 2 or 3 weeks he's done really well, and if you remember last week in Brazil, he qualified well and he finished, I think, in 5th or 6th, if memory serves me right. So kind of strange to see Bottas having slipped down there out of qualifying this early on. But he's out, and so we're going to start the qualifying 2 session in just a minute. So if you remember the way it works, in qualifying 1, we have 20 cars and we have 20 minutes. And then qualifying 2, we have 15 cars and 14 minutes. Where they come up with 14 minutes, I don't know, but that's the way it is. And then, of course, in qualifying 3, they have 10 cars and 12 minutes. So we'll see what happens here in the next qualifying session, which is about to start. And I'm going to take this opportunity right now to thank another one of our sponsors, and in this case I'm going to thank Give Send Go. Folks, you can't help what happens to you in an emergency and if something goes wrong in your life, but you can choose the right goal, the right crowdfunding entity to help you through these hard times. Whether it's for you or a family member or just a friend, you've got a choice in who you can ask to help get you the money that you need to help get you through these tough times. And also, it might not be a tough time that you're trying to get through. It may be that you've got a great business idea and you want to raise capital for your new business. So you've got to think about Give, Send, Go. That is givesendgo.com. They are the number 1 entity for where they don't think about censoring, or they don't care about what your religion or your politics or whatever that is in your life. They just want to help get you the money to make you whole again, or get you the money to get into your business. So please go to givesendgo.com. That is givesendgo.com. So right now, and we've just passed the 7-minute mark, we have Perez, Verstappen, Sainz, Norris, and then Leclerc. Those are your top 5. The Mercedes have slipped down to 7 and 8, so that's kind of surprising. Because they did quite well in qualifying 1, and then rounding out the bottom is you've got Tsunoda, Ricciardo, Stroll, Mick Schumacher, and Joe Granu. So obviously that's not going to stay the way it is. I would be surprised to find Daniel Ricciardo not making it through to Q1. He's been quite fast in practice and quite fast in the Q1 session. So I would expect to see Daniel Ricciardo pull himself out of that bottom group and at least make it into Q3, which would put him in, of course, the top 10 in the starting grid. So we've got another about 8 minutes to go now. So let's just sit back, watch and relax and see where these results end up. Okay, so with 3 minutes to go, the top 5 have changed around, and Lewis Hamilton has kind of come to the top. Perez is now the fastest, and then followed by Hamilton, and then Verstappen, and then Sainz, and who is that? And Norris. So the top 5 have swapped around. In fact, we've got the addition of Hamilton in there. The bottom 5 has not changed. We've still got the Tsunoda and Ricciardo and those guys stuck in the bottom, which is really strange to see Daniel Ricciardo stuck in there. But right now, he is stuck at 17th position. So to get out of this, he's got to make up, he's in 12th position. Remember, we're in Q2. He's in 12th position, so he's got to make up 2 places to get out of the bottom of the Q2 session and get into Q1. So let's see how it goes here over the next 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, so we're coming to the end, and it looks like Perez is going to round out Q2 as the leader, followed by the Ferraris of Leclerc and Sainz. And of course, you know, Perez is trying to beat out Charles Leclerc for the number 2 spot in the World Championship, so he really wants to make sure Leclerc stays behind him. And then Verstappen closes out number 4 and Hamilton number 5. Daniel Ricciardo did manage to pull himself out. He is in position number 10, so he is the last place there. But Alonso has fallen out along with Tsunoda, Schumacher, Lance Stroll, and then the last of Joe Granu. It's interesting to see Joe Granu all the way down there, because he's done a really good job this year of getting into Q1, but not to be this weekend. And remember, the tracks make a difference, tires make a difference, all kinds of things make a difference to these drivers and the different tracks. You know, the way they take corners, the way they come out of the corners, the way they brake going into corners. They lose a 1/10 of a second here and a 1/15 of a second there, and it all adds up. And at the end of the day, by the time you've got a track with, say, 17, 18 corners, the 10ths and the 15ths add up to 1.5 seconds. So you can see why at the end of the day, these cars end up in the positions that they do. It's a very, very interesting. If you watch these guys live and you watch how they go into corners, how they change gears, the different gears they get into to come out of the corners, it's very interesting to see the different drivers and how they handle different corners going into and out of the corners. And of course, that's where they make up or lose pace. you know, most of the time they're going to lose, so they got to hope like Red Bull does. Red Bull's very, very good down the straights, very fast, typically 6-7 miles an hour faster than the competition down the straightaways. But it doesn't take a lot to lose that as you go through the corners. So that's what's going on right now. Is you're seeing the drivers' ability to handle the corners, or the cars and the drivers. Because remember, this is such a team thing, and the way that the teams set up the cars, whether they want more downforce on the front wheels or the rear wheels, or you know, in practice they're allowed, in qualifying they're allowed to open up the DRS systems. So that goes and that moves a lot of the air that is typically over the rear of the car and moves it to the front of the car. So it just depends on exactly, you know, the setup that they've got, where they might want to, during this setup, want to take a little out of those front wings and let the pressure come off the front wheels. That allows less downforce, that allows them to get more speed, especially down the straightaway. Okay, so we are now just 5 minutes left into Q3, and Verstappen is out there, followed by Sainz, Perez and Leclerc. So I would look for maybe another pit stop here for some slight adjustments to be made. But at this point, I would say that Verstappen is probably going to end up in pole position, and maybe one of the Ferraris of Carlos Sainz or Leclerc. Sainz will be helping his teammate Leclerc, so don't be surprised if it's, you know, the pole position is Verstappen, but alongside him is Charles Leclerc. But you can't count out the fact that at some point here, as we close in, that Verstappen is going to help his teammate Checo Perez get as far up that qualifying as possible, because they want Checo to beat Leclerc tomorrow and become the number 2 driver for the year. That would give Red Bull number 1 and 2 for the drivers and number 1 for the championship. On the other hand, Leclerc's got to get ahead and make sure he stays ahead of Hamilton and George Russell for the Constructors' Championship. And then, of course, he wants to finish ahead of Checo Perez so that he can get the number 2 position in the Drivers' Championship. So lots of really, really interesting things going on here. Right now, Ricciardo is still, he's hanging there on the 10th position. Followed by Sebastian Vettel. You know, we haven't brought him up a lot during that, but Vettel made it out of Q1, out of Q2, and he's into Q3, which is really strange, because I don't think the Aston Martins have made it into Q3 much in the entire year. So Sebastian Vettel, for his last qualifying session, is having a hell of. In fact, he's just come on the radio and complaining about the Red Bull cars that held him up in Q1, Q2, and it now looks like, as we're coming to the end of Q3, he's complaining that the Red Bull cars are holding him up in the Q3 sessions and costing him 1/10 of a second. So really, really interesting. But he should be really happy for his final qualifying session in a car that's not so great. The Aston Martins have not been that good. And have not met expectations for this year. They made a lot of changes to those cars this year, and they've just not managed to get the speed out of them that they had hoped for. Kind of like the Haas. Haas had really felt like coming into 2022, they were going to make a big change in where their positions are. And quite frankly, it's been Aston Martin, Haas, and Alpine that's filled out the bottom 4 positions all year long. We got Alfa Romeo, not Alpine, AlphaTauri, and we've got Alfa Romeo, McLaren, and Alpine fighting for those, 3, 4, 5 positions in the championship series. So the fact that Vettel's made it here is great. Where he ends up tomorrow, who knows? But tomorrow's his last race, and of course everybody's welcoming him well. And Lewis Hamilton, from what I'm told, sprung for $140,000 to buy every Formula One driver dinner the other night in celebration of Sebastian Vettel. Now there's 20 drivers. How do you get a $140,000 tab? I think there's bogus there. I don't think you can get that. Let's say every driver costs $500, right? You don't get close to $140,000. So I think there's some misinformation going out there. Whatever it was very nice of Lewis Hamilton to spring for the dinner for all those drivers. And while I've been talking about all this stuff, the Q3 has just come to an end. And really, really interesting. We've got Red Bull 1 and 2. We've got Verstappen on pole, followed by Perez. Then we've got Leclerc and Sainz, and then we've got the Mercedes of Hamilton and Russell. And then filling out the bottom, we've got Vettel and Ricciardo. But really, really interesting that. So you've got really the top three teams that have been battling it out all year. Going into the final race, it's 1, 2, 3 in that order. And I'm sure Ferrari would like to see the race finish that way tomorrow, so that that they possibly, for the championship, for the Constructors' Championship, they'd like to see it end up that way tomorrow. Of course, they'd like to see Charles Leclerc ahead of Checo Perez when the race ends tomorrow. So as we end the qualifying sessions and get ready for the race tomorrow, which starts here at 7 a.m. In Austin, Texas. And of course, I will be up and live and getting this podcast to you as it happens. I just want to thank another one of our sponsors, and this time we're going to thank El American. El American is a news station out of Miami, Florida, that brings just the news. There's no opinions. There's no, none of these guys sitting up there spouting off what they think or what should be or shouldn't be. They've just got good reporters reporting the news. And incidentally, they're reporting it in both English and Spanish. So if you want to get good, hard news facts and you only speak Spanish, go to elamerican.com. If you want to get it in English, go to elamerican.com. That is elamerican.com for all of the facts on the news, not opinions. elamerican.com.